So I am here with my friend Amanda, who also has lived experience, and thought it would be great to hear kind of about some of the things that you've gone through, some of the things that you do as a helper of others. But I guess I can just start out. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Amanda. By profession, I'm a social worker therapist, although I generally don't work because I'm on disability due to bipolar. I'm also a wife of 17 years, a mother of 3 essentially teenagers, and 2 very large dogs who keep wanting me to throw the ball. I'm about 7 years into my diagnosis with bipolar 1, which is rapid cycling. I've been hospitalized 8 times from 2013 to 2017. In 2016, I survived 3 suicide attempts, 2 of which resulted in severe injury. And I survived 3 suicide attempts as a teenager that nobody ever knew about. And I'm about 4.5 years into finally finding a medication that actually treated my bipolar. And I'm happier than I had ever hoped to be. And I, aside from not owning a lake house, I have everything I had ever hoped I could have in my life at this point. So things are actually really good. And there was a point when I just wanted to stop trying to kill myself. Like that was the only goal, just that.
Well, aside from the lake house, which probably the real estate market, that's not in the immediate future, but maybe still in the foreseeable future.
Yep.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Hey, if it's okay, if I share a little bit about how we know each other. So in the state of Michigan, we have what is called the Suicide Prevention Community Technical Assistance Meeting. Did I get that right? It's a mouthful.
I think so.
And it's a meeting, but it's more of a conference. It's usually a multi-day conference in Roscommon, Michigan. And there was a panel that I was really excited about. And I think it was supposed to be 2 or 3 people, but it was clinicians. So in the mental health field, clinicians that had lived experience. And I think it was presented as maybe not even just lived experiences, but attempt survivors. Was that specifically the panel? And I eagerly got my seat in this for this breakout presentation. And there was one of the panelists didn't show up. I remember it was it seemed like it was going to be a group thing. And then you kind of had to bear the weight of almost the entire presentation, to my recollection.
Yeah, I was supposed to present with somebody else who has lived experience. I don't believe they're an attempt survivor, but they're lived experience, but she couldn't make it at the last minute. And so I kind of presented the entire thing on the fly. I didn't even have anything written down besides 3 words. So yeah, I carried the whole thing, and it went far better than I had hoped.
Well, for my seat, it was wonderful. It was amazing. And I had been working in mental health at the time and was trying to do this thing of kind of coming out about my personal experiences within my workplace, something very hard to do. So I just got, just tons of, I don't know if inertia is the right word, but motivation from listening to you, and was really grateful. I kind of went out, because I'm fairly shy, went out on a limb to try to connect with you. And I guess to share really other important part of the story of our connection is we started developing the ideas for suicide attempt survivor support group. And this would have been 2018, probably.
I think it was 2018.
Yep, in 2018. And so, I would not have done that without seeing your presentation, without connecting with you and getting that started. So super important to me. You're a very important friend to me. We usually only get to see each other at suicide prevention conferences, which are oddly not terrible. They can be depressing, but they're not completely depressing things to go to.
Yeah, I probably laughed far too much at the last Kevin Song conference, and if I remember correctly, we got in trouble for it.
Although it was during an evening presentation, and there may have been beverages served. I can't recall.
I don't remember either.
There were a lot of good excuses I have tucked in my brain about that. Well, I don't have a real rigid format to stick to today, but I wanted to ask just a few questions. And you've kind of already referenced, this may be asked and answered, but there might be more nuances and details to some of these questions. So if you don't mind, I'll start with, I guess in addition to what you've shared, how has your life been impacted by suicide?
My cousin, when I was, I think I was a junior in high school, died by suicide. She actually died in a cluster of suicides at the high school she was attending. And I had already attempted once before that. Actually, no, I think all three of my teenage suicide attempts were prior to that. And then because as a result of her suicide attempt, and seeing the impact on her siblings and on her family and on my family, I swore that I would never do that again. A year later, the first boy I ever loved, he died by suicide my freshman year of college. And it was devastating. He lived out of state, so I didn't get to attend his funeral. And my heart still breaks. And then a few years later, I had another colleague, friend at work die by suicide. People I've known have lost loved ones to suicide. And then with my own attempts, it's not something that people talk about, but it is something that most people are touched by, whether they've lost a loved one to suicide, or whether they've had suicidal thoughts, or whether they've survived their own attempt that they never talk about. People don't talk about any of it. And what I know is that the only way to get through it, whether it's surviving an attempt or surviving a loss, is to talk about it. And so I've tried to, when I've felt strong enough, I guess is the word, be someone who can talk about it. Because I know that when we do that, we give permission for other people to talk about it as well. And I know that talking about it alleviates the shame, which then reduces the chance that anyone else in the future will attempt, or the people who are touched by that conversation will attempt in the future. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, we think about for many families that might have someone who's died by suicide, don't even want to admit that they took their own lives, and imagine, well, then how are you ever going to be able to cope and heal and grieve from that if we can't acknowledge that? If not personally, can't always acknowledge that amongst others. I obviously know how hard it is to reach out for help, and I would say most of the times where I thought it was always this very, like, there are these elements of plausible deniability to it, like not really putting all the cards on the table kind of a thing, but by you talking about it, I think gave me permission to talk about it, which now that's what I'm trying to do, and trying to get more people to talk about it. So thank you. Needless to say, you've seen inside and out of suicide. And then professionally, I don't know if that's not inside or out, that's like bird's eye view kind of, as well as like microscopic. So you kind of like see all scopes of it. In terms of suicide prevention, this is a really open-ended question, and feel free to answer it however it strikes you, but what does suicide prevention mean to you?
I think suicide prevention means exactly what I just said. We have to talk about it. I've spoken with parents professionally and personally who are afraid to broach the subject to their kids. I'm a mother with 3 teenagers, and I'm a professional and I tell people to talk and I tell people to ask. And it was still terrifying to me to ask that question to my kids when I've seen them struggling. I stumbled over the question, and it's actually really embarrassed about it, because professionally I should know better. I shouldn't struggle, but they're my kids, and it's a really difficult question. And so suicide prevention means we have to be brave and we have to ask. And it also means we have to be brave and we have to tell. And And if we tell the first person and we don't get a supportive response, we have to be brave enough to say it again, that we need help. And I know that that's really hard. I know that it's far easier to say than it is to do. But it's the only way that we get through it. And there's a lot of fear around suicide that I think is understandable, but I think is not based in reality. The big fear is that if we bring it up, people are it's going to put the idea in their heads.
Right.
And it's just already there. Like, if you think you need to bring it up with somebody, I almost guarantee that idea has crossed their head already. Like, you're never going to suggest that to them and have you be a brand new piece of information that's never occurred to them. But what you're going to do is it's going to normalize it. And, oh, they're asking me about it, so it must be okay. And then you keep talking about it. My husband is also a social worker and I'm a social worker. So our kids are going to have their own therapy for that. But we've got the crisis numbers up. I've given them each these little booklets of all kinds of crisis numbers. I made sure they put the crisis numbers in their phones. I think I've handed them out to their friends every once in a while. And that's what it is. It's talking about it. Suicide attempts are no different in many ways than any other kind of physical illness. You have to acknowledge that it's an issue, and then you have to confront it and deal with it in the most appropriate way. And that's personal, but there are also some general ideas of how to, treat it and manage it.
Well, speaking of kids, I think we know pretty well at this time when young people are struggling, not super likely to always tell the adults in their lives, even their parents, even if their parents have the expertise of multiple degrees in social work, and still probably not that likely to talk about it. So I can't help but imagine that your children are probably already giving those resources to their peers, because their peers probably aren't going to their parents. They're probably going, and so I can easily imagine that your children are already setting that model of it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to get help. I think, diffusely that, that message is getting out there, even if there's nothing we can do that's going to make, a teenager or 14-year-old is going to want to come talk to their uncool or cool parent about it, right?
Well, I don't think any kid thinks their parent's cool. And I'm pretty sure that if your kids think you're cool, you're probably doing something wrong. But yeah, it's, because my kids are teenagers and at times they've been pretty open with me, it kind of comes and goes with how much they're willing to share with me. And one is exceptionally private. And I think there's another one that just, I think, tells me everything. But, they've had friends who've struggled, and, it's not just about, you can talk to me. It's about, well, who would you be comfortable with? It's pre-planning these things. And it's not, this doesn't just apply to just suicide prevention. It's if you're at a party and you're in trouble, who can you call? If you have something that you need to talk to an adult about and you don't want to talk to me about it, or your dad for whatever reason, who do you trust? Fortunately, my kids have a young adult cousin that they connect with, and I think they would feel comfortable reaching out to. But it's they don't need to just come to me, but if they need an adult, they need to be able to talk to an adult about it. So who are the safe adults? Who can they reach out to? If you need to run away from home, which aunt are you going to run to? Because please don't run anyplace else, but feel free to run to your aunt's house. It's okay. I've been a teenager. I know sometimes you need to get away. So it's having those conversations about safe places for talking about hard things, or if things get too much, or it's helping them build and look at their community and see who they can reach out to.
And building that infrastructure in advance, right? But before it hits the fan, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Building it. Yeah. I think we all know that trying to develop a crisis plan in the middle of everything hitting the fan is a terrible option. So, and I'm not therapeutically, clinically, I've always kind of been not a huge fan of safety plans, but I do think that the act of building one and working on one and, going over it, that builds in the skill and the framework for when you are in crisis, that you know what to do. That you've got the pieces of it put in place already. even if the details change.
Yeah, and has the potential, and it's not always done in practice in an ideal way, but also has the potential to give you a time of reflection, right? And this kind of non-judgmental kind of just reflecting, yep, this is what I went through. Maybe I can learn something about myself in that process. Yeah. Well, going back to the struggles that you've been through, and I know you mentioned just talking about it, and that can certainly be part of the answer, but are there other things beyond that you would say have really brought you healing?
Yes.
Oh wait, I was supposed to frame that in an open-ended question. Let me figure out how to do that.
Okay.
What else has brought you healing?
That light sucks. You know, I think some of what I do, I think to a certain extent, some of what I do, and I think the rigidity of what I do it is probably specific to the fact that I have bipolar 1. I have mood swings 4 times a year. They're nowhere near as disabling as they were, but they're still noticeable. And so I most days do a variety of things, and I track them on my phone. And you know, there's the social worker in me is like, oh well, that's just, you know, you were just building back the rhythms of, you know, the day. And I forget what that kind of therapy is, but I was kind of doing that instinctively. I track my moods, and I've seen people like do charts on Pinterest. I use an app on my phone called eMoods. I don't get paid for it, but I do love the app. And I pay for it, and it allows me to add in different things that I chart. And over the years, I've charted different things, trying to figure out what triggers are and what red flags are for me. But I find that to be really useful in noticing when I'm doing well and when I'm not doing well, if there's any kind of patterns. Exercise. I try and do it daily, but I don't, especially when it's 95 and humid out. That actually is a really big one. Recently, I've started getting into meditation, which I've tried to do for 20 years. And just these past 6 months, I think my brain has finally gotten to a place where it can actually do it and use it. And it's had a significant impact on like my overall well-being and being able to manage my moods and even being able to manage my thoughts, which I always used to say that my brain was a really scary place to be. But the meditation has been very helpful in that. I think, you know, the biggest, you know, comforts and the biggest supports have been, you know, the people in my life. I have a really amazing husband who I always used to say that he, even when I was horribly sick, still saw me. And he was always able to tell, usually, and respond to me and and he never held against me symptoms of the illness. And the fact that he still saw me as like this whole person, even when I was so sick that I couldn't work and I could barely function and literally physically couldn't get out of bed at times. And other days where I shouldn't get out of bed because my brain was racing so bad, it was unsafe for me I couldn't even drive. That was huge. And he's not perfect. He's a human being and he gets tired too. But he was there when other people in my life didn't see how sick I was. And I was accused early on, or I was told, people said that I was just being dramatic early on. I have bipolar, that is pretty dramatic, but eventually, fortunately or unfortunately, I was so sick that everybody could tell that I was that sick. I mean, you can't hide it at that point, which I think it's in some ways was a little bit of a blessing. I wouldn't wish it on anybody because I wouldn't want anyone to get that sick. It's a really terrible thing to be afraid of your own mind and your own brain. But I don't know. I think at this point I forgot your question, but
no, because you've already answered it.
Yeah.
I think tenfold.
Okay.
And I think, well, you just said something that kind of almost reminds me that idea that you almost people don't really believe, because mental health, behavioral health, whatever you want to call it, is really typically, even though behavioral, very unseen, right? Evidently human behavior is very complex, and there's a wide variety of behaviors all amongst us. So to know or to believe that is caused from that there's actually something internally going on that's not quite right, like that can be unseen, completely unseen to some people. So you just reminded me of that, kind of the way even our behavioral health system, sometimes it's like you have to fail first, like this kind of fail first model, which I think we don't have our hands tied, but I mean, I think there are just elements that we really need to progress towards it, in this idea that, you know, how nobody's going to know how bad it is until they really see it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had some episodes where I was so sick that I was slurring my words, and the hospital staff thought I was on drugs. My husband had thought I had a stroke, and they actually even did an MRI because he requested it because I was slurring words. And no, my brain chemistry is just that horrible. Because it's, people forget words here and there, but people start slurring. That's a lot more obvious. Like I got so sick that it was just very obvious. When I got so sick that they give me doses in the ER of medication that would put down a horse, and I'd still be vibrating and it wouldn't affect me at all. And so, like I said, it's really in some ways a blessing is when they do the drug screen and they can tell that I'm not on anything, that I wasn't prescribed, but my behavior is that obvious. I felt like it was easier for me to be taken seriously. And I also had the blessing of my husband actually worked in the ER with the staff. So, they trusted him, so therefore they trusted me. And I wish that everybody had the ability when they needed to go to the ER with a mental health issue, or that they had a loved one who the staff knew.
To be believed.
I mean, because even now with my history, I'm afraid to go to the ER for anything on my own, even though I have no reason to, because I've been lucky to have good experiences for the most part. But I know that if I tell them that I have bipolar, and they know that when I tell them what drugs I'm on, it's obvious it's bipolar, I'm afraid that I won't be taken seriously. I'm afraid that I won't be believed. So the fail first doesn't work, because I struggled for 20 years with symptoms and with issues that I was fortunate enough, or not fortunate enough, to be able to pretend that I was fine. Really wasn't. Really, really wasn't. I just was able to hide it. And I think a lot of people with psychiatric issues are really good at pretending. And when you're seemingly functioning really well, the fact that inside your head is, hell is happening. People can't see it, and they can't know. Guess we have to talk about it.
Well, and not to mention that as both you and I have survived suicide attempts, right? There's elements of that where can't really attribute it to much more than luck at a certain point. So that failure could be life and death, right? That's You talked about meditation and exercise. I wondered if there are other certain things you do and this term has kind of entered the cultural milieu and might come across as jargon or, things used to sell products but self-care, like if you don't mind talking a little bit more about self-care and what you do.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons that I was able to keep myself safe for as much as I did, and then to be able to recover in the way that I have, is because of my education, because I have an MSW, and it was in mental health. And I was able to understand that I would have certain goals And I had to taper them to where I was at. There was a period of time where my self-care was, I would get out of bed in the morning, I'd get my kids off, and then I would make my bed. And that was the only thing I accomplished all day. But I still made my bed every day. Like I made my bed every day for a year, no matter how sick I was. Even if I just climbed right back in and on top of it, I made the bed. And I honestly believe, and I think there's a lot of psychology behind it, that setting that goal and being able to achieve that every day was like that kind of like that life vest that I held on to. I wasn't able to brush my teeth. I could shower once a week sometimes. I always took care of my kids, but I couldn't take care of myself. And, taking care of them would mean like, boxed macaroni and cheese or chicken nuggets, but they got fed. But for myself, I made my bed every day, and I built that up. And eventually like I leveled up to, well, okay, I'm going to shower every day now. And then I just kind of expanded, and I would just add things. And, even when I haven't been really sick in a long time. But on days when I do struggle, I still actually, I don't make my bed in general now. Like I don't see the point in it, but on days when I'm really struggling, I will go back to, and I will make my bed just because it's kind of an anchor for me.
Yeah. Anchor. I think that's a perfect word for it. Sorry, go ahead.
No, there's a lot of other things that I did. Like, I would learn to give myself, manicures because paint my own nails because it's too expensive to have it done. Or something that I really love that is a little expensive is I do float therapy, which is like an isolation tank. I only do it a couple times a year. I find it more relaxing than a massage, which I do love massages, but so that's an expensive thing. But I think especially with when my mind is a little, I use the word mushy, when my mind's a little mushy, the isolation tank really helps kind of settle the quiet, because it's a sensory deprivation tank. So you're floating in like, salt water. There's no sound. You can't see anything. And it's just quiet, and it helps quiet my mind. And there's other stuff that I've done on and off, but it's picking it. I honestly, when I talk to clients or when I do other speeches, it doesn't really matter what it is, as long as it's significant to you, the person. And if you're trying to do it and you keep failing, like it's not working, it's okay to change it. Like there was a period of time where I would try and do yoga every day. Well, I really suck at doing yoga every day, but I could do it a couple times a week. So I'm happy with that. Like it's being flexible in whatever the goal is. And then if you're pushing yourself and you're not able to do it because it's too hard, like if running a mile is too far, well, can you go out for a walk, or can you walk for 5 minutes? I've been so sick where even a 5-minute walk is exhausting just from being depressed. So I just kind of really met myself, as to use a therapeutic term, really met myself where I was at, and then try to push myself to do that.
You mentioned, I'm just trying to think of different strategies that I've used, but thinking about, I don't necessarily use these terms when I think of them, but like anchors and maybe resets. Like I'm starting to conceptualize things kind of in terms of, for me, my anchors are usually cognitive strategies, like perspective changings are things that I can always go back to, but exercise can physically just, and I really need to push myself a bit for like at least an hour or so, or near it. But yeah, there's like a reset to it where does it always work? No. Do I always do it when I think I need to do it? No. But just knowing that you have a tool and knowing that there's something that has helped at some point is really a tool in itself, like that awareness of it.
Yeah. The exercise has been a big one for me as well. And it is something that I do try and make sure that I get. For me, it's like at least 30 solid minutes of like really pushing myself like 3 to 4 times a week. And I know my body and my knee, like I've been trying to run for like ever for years, but my knee doesn't like to do it for longer than a few months before it gives out on me. So I'm trying to learn to not stop completely, but to then, switch to something else for a while. Like right now I'm focusing on strength training and building my muscles up. And so it's not just having that anchor, but it's also allowing myself to change and make an adaptation so that I can continue doing something, but maybe not in the exact way that I had planned. Because sometimes my brain gets on one path, and it's difficult to change gears, but that's necessary. That's life. So.
Right. Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to comment on, and this not related to self-care, but not in the way that you mentioned it, but talking about just the idea of being, if there's one thing you can do, making the bed. One of the kind of shameful things that I experienced was probably for at least a half a year, probably close to a year. I had a period that I didn't brush my teeth at all. And like, just like for me to even say that, there are these elements of like shame and like, oh man, there's all this imaginary or real judgment that's now going to come at you, but that was really where I was for a period. And sometimes finding one thing that you can do, and focusing on that could be huge.
Yeah. And I honestly, and I've spoken with people I've spoken with a lot of people personally and professionally who have severe mental illnesses. And that's the struggle for personal hygiene is huge, and it's incredibly common. I've never spoken to somebody with bipolar who didn't struggle with that being an issue. And there's a lot of shame with that, with brushing your teeth or showering regularly. There has to be some sort of place in the brain where that information and motivation to do that is stored, right, that is affected when you're very ill. So it's really common. And yeah, it was an issue for me. And my husband would be like, hey, could you just go take care of that? Yes, fine, I can. But in him gently reminding me was usually enough to get me to do it, but I wouldn't think to do it on my own.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an issue.
Yeah. It's not just hard to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. Sometimes it's hard to just pick up a toothbrush. So it's like, yeah, will yourself, but a reminder could go a long way though, too.
Yeah, a gentle reminder, a compassionate reminder.
So with knowing all the things that and being able to have, I guess, just extra layers of insight as far as strategies and as far as how the mind works because of your, professional expertise, thinking of all these things together, and then maybe even just in broader in suicide prevention and helping others in general, what do you find that gives you hope?
There are a lot of people doing really amazing work, compassionately to advocate on behalf of people who've lost people to suicide and people who have attempted and survived, and people who are struggling with thoughts. And that gives me hope that there's so many people, there are so many voices, even when there's disagreement on specific strategies and paths, the fact that there's so many people involved in it and talking about it really does give me hope. Sometimes in my community, I would wish that I could be more vocal, but I have to take care of myself and take care of my family first. And I only have so much energy in a day. But then other people come out and they're leading a seminar for parents, or they're advocating, different, crisis numbers for, students. And then there's the way that, just listening to my kids talk about mental health. And I don't think it's just because I'm pretty vocal in my house about it, although I haven't been vocal with my kids about my own suicide attempts because I was told and it was suggested to me by more than one of my therapists and professionals that because of the ages of my kids, that I would wait until the youngest is old enough to really understand and process, because kids do tend to think everything is about them. And I would never want my kids to think that I attempted because I don't love them or because they were terrible kids, because it was the exact opposite. My brain was just very sick. And anyway, but those are the things that give me hope. And listening to my kids talk about mental health, especially this past year in the pandemic, it makes me really proud. I'm able to see them speaking about and advocating for themselves and their friends in ways that were unthinkable when I was their ages. When, unfortunately, my parents' generation had a generally less understanding or less educated view of mental health. And so getting help or needing help, some really terrible stories of things that adults said or did to me when I was a high school and middle school student. And none of that would happen now. There is a lot more compassion. There's a lot more understanding. And I believe, I know that the suicide rates are going up, but I also believe that that compassion, that understanding, and the education on the parts of, professionals and the parts of, just people who feel motivated to get the information on their own, I think that is saving lives. And that does help.
Yeah, it gives me hope to hear that too. But also just the idea that people care, that people are doing something which kind of makes me feel like, and I know many of us have been impacted by suicide in different ways, but it kind of makes me feel like I'm seen in a way if I see there's somebody that cares and is trying to help their community, even if I never touch that community in any way whatsoever, just knowing that there are people there, there's this just kind of a sense that, yeah, society is a good place. We need to focus on those, the good things that people are doing. So
yep, focus on the good things. Exactly.
If I could ask, and sometimes I think, especially in suicide prevention and in trying to help somebody, we can all risk this. Sometimes we can be too quick to give unsolicited advice, this idea of making things come across as quick fixes. So that's by no means the question I'm about to ask, but if you could give advice to someone who might be struggling with thoughts of suicide right now, what would it be?
I think I'm going to turn your question around. I think I would actually rather give advice to the people who think their loved ones might be struggling. And the piece of advice is, and I'm going to just be really blunt about this, it's just shut up and listen. Don't give your loved one any advice. Don't try and ease their pain. Don't try and, make them see that it's not that bad. Just sit with them and listen. The phrase I use is sit in the suck. I don't think I came up with that, but I don't remember who said it to me. It's, you need to sit in it with them. There have been few moments in my life that have been as healing and that have given me more hope than when I have felt absolutely lost and someone sat there and held my hand in quiet. Because sometimes it's very hard to find the words. And so somebody sitting there and being quiet allowed me time to either find the words or just be quiet with them in their strength and in their love and in their support. And so to go back to your original question, it would be to find the people who will sit in it with you and trust them and trust in their strength. And if you can't find that person, then keep looking, because there are people out there who will do that. There are people who will do that for strangers. There are crisis lines. There are community centers. People who have no idea what they're doing will sit in it with you. And I know that it's hard, and I know that it's painful. I can remember times where I was in physical pain, actual physical pain from the mental stuff that was going on, and to just find the people who sit in with you. And that is where the strength and that is where the support comes.
So if I could paraphrase just for further emphasis, find someone who will sit in the suck with you. Is that, yes. Find someone who will sit in the suck. That's
just be
great. Careful
that they're not going to drag you down deeper. It's one thing to emphasize. It's one thing to find support. It's another thing to find somebody who just adds to your pain. And some people do that accidentally. So if you're with someone and you're sitting in the suck and it feels good, and then they start to drag you down and you feel worse, find someone else.
And probably if you're the person sitting in the suck, to be mindful of whether you are at a place that you're not getting kind of sucked into.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, we're not always in a place where we can do that with somebody, and that's okay. But you can help them find someone who is, whether that's another friend or another family or a professional. To be mindful of what you're able to do as well, because we don't want to harm ourselves either.
Well, thanks you so much for sharing.
If you like this video, comment, click subscribe, and give a like below. Take a deep breath, now let it out, roll your shoulders back, and hold your head up high.